seems like things are slowing down, and I think we can start with our webinar today. And it really gives me a pleasure, and it's an honor to welcome all of you here on behalf of Flirt Rock and the Flirt Rock Academy. Really my honor to host this webinar on a topic that I am particularly interested in. You know, if you think about Flirt Rock, we eat and sleep and dream and everyday effective and well-governed corporate citizens, because that's what we want to see. And we probably, as part of that, attend, I don't think I'll be exaggerating if I say we attend thousands of board and board committee meetings on an annual basis. And as such, as observers in the boardroom, we can probably write a book ourselves on what we have observed in boardrooms. Shall we have a chapter on the good, a chapter on the bad, and a chapter on the ugly, something along those lines. But we have seen a lot, and I do think that my colleagues will therefore kind of agree with me that this is an extremely important topic today. And I think that kind of is also borne out by the level of interest we got and the number of registrations we did receive for the webinar. So thank you for that. As always, you're very welcome. Use the Q&A. If you have any comments, any questions to make, just in the chat, tell us where you're from, who you are, just say hi. We will keep our eye on both the chat and the Q&A. Very welcome to communicate with us there. We would love, and I'm sure Sonia and Paul will appreciate making this not a kind of a one-way lecture, but that we have some interesting and robust conversation on this topic as well. I have with me on the topic two leading experts in the field. And if I go with our ladies first, Paul, I'm going to quickly introduce Sonia. Sonia is a training manager at the Voice Clinic, where she really have been in her industry for more than 24 years. And Sonia, I think similar to me, you will also be able to say that it's probably not your qualifications and your educational background that qualifies you to talk on this, more the scars you have on your back on what you have seen in the industry as well. But you do have very impressive academic qualifications in psychology and communication and speech coaching. And I would say Sonia, and I think this is what makes Sonia so successful in what she does, she really cares for the person in front of her. So her focus is on developing the whole person. Sonia, I must tell you, I had feedback from one of the attendees of one of my colleagues that attended recently your presentation skill course. And the person's words were, it made such a difference in my life that I woke up this morning with a song in my heart. I was quite taken aback. I didn't think that attending a workshop on presentation skills would kind of have, but that tells you that you're successful and you're obviously achieving, your goal. You've worked with all the large, organizations in this country. You've also worked in public sector. But really, your expertise is on effective communication, customer excellence, and how we engage as human beings. And I think that makes you a very appropriate kind of panelist with me today. And then Paul, thank you. If I remember correctly, you're based in Canada. So thank you so much for joining us from Canada. Paul, very equal to Sonia, has had 25 years experience in corporate secretarial, corporate governance, the regulatory experience in field and industry, the UK, Canada. You've worked all over, Paul, the Caribbean, the Middle East. I don't know why you left the Caribbean to Canada.
I ask myself that sometimes.
We can have a conversation on that. I think in one of your corporate roles, you were the head of corporate governance of First Abu Dhabi Bank, which is one of the largest banks in the Gulf region. And then you kind of went an interesting direction in becoming a certified life coach and a group coach. and also a certified EQ assessor and practitioner. And today, with also your own organization, Perfect Balance Consulting, of course, you also are the host and the presenter on the Fluid Rock workshop that we present on EQ for governance professionals, which is based on the book that you wrote on the topic. So, ladies and gents, attendees, having listened to the very brief, I've really had to try and summarize the very impressive profiles of my two esteemed colleagues on the panel with me. I think you will agree with me that they're definitely the right people to have in the room. And so why this conversation? Why body language in the boardroom? And I've already kind of alluded to the fact that because of the kind of work we do, the vision at Fluid Rock, we observe a lot of the undercurrents, the dynamics in boards. And we don't have the time to kind of, delve into too much of what I'm going to say as a few opening remarks to set the scene. So you're going to have to distrust me if I say this to you, that boards have a very real impact, whether good or bad, but a definite direct impact on the performance and the success or the failure of organizations. There was a study done in 2013 on the root causes of 40 corporate disasters. And interestingly and shockingly, the 7 top root causes and dynamics that were found to be at play in these corporate disasters and corporate failures all emanate from the boardroom. I think that in itself tells you that, it's not just a ceremonial group of people coming together, nodding their heads a few times, having a nice lunch, going home and banking the board fees. You have a real impact. And therefore, in other words, if the board does affect the performance and the success or otherwise of the company, then it could also go, or the organization, it should also be kind of an obvious next step to say, if that is the case, then obviously who is in the room, composition of the board is of equal importance and will impact the functionality and the effectiveness of the board. Now, how do we compose boards? If when I have to, and this is not a contest, but I kind of, and I don't know whether one should really want to say that, but I have been in boardrooms now more than 32 years, which means I've got even more scars on my back. But in my, years, and when I started in this career, it was very much the way that a new director was appointed, was the chairman saying that, Saturday at the golf, somebody told him about his neighbor, said the neighbor's cousin's middle son, or son-in-law had a qualification and was quite an impressive person. And maybe, we should consider this person to be appointed to the board because, they apparently have a background in our industry, or they've got a financial background, a risk background. So that was very often how people ended up in the boardroom. Today, I have to admit that we have become a little bit more, I think, more professionalized as far as, board composition is concerned. Many boards that we deal with now understand there's a need for a skills matrix. Of course, when they do that skills matrix, it's very much about what are the qualifications, what is the industry experience that we require in this board and in the boardroom. And the people, that's how individuals come into the board. I recall, if I can quickly share a personal experience quite a number of years ago, sitting in the boardroom where the chair one day said, he came across, and I was jokingly saying about the golf, but I think if I remember correctly, that's exactly what he said. That, at the golf, somebody told him about this individual who had a very impressive CV and profile in the industry and in the area of sustainability, and that he thought that this person would really, be a welcome addition to the board. And everybody, the heads went like this because this is the chairman, and we don't, seldom kind of argue with the way the chairman wants to go. The person did end up as a director. I want to say, I think, was in 2 board meetings. There was probably what you can call a boardroom revolt. in that the rest of the directors were saying to the chair, you have one or two options, either the gentleman, this individual departs, or we depart. But we are not going to sit at every board meeting and be made, to feel as though we are all crooks and unethical, and this person is the only ethical person in the room. Unfortunately, the person's demeanor and way of communication was never looked at and caused an absolute breakdown in relationships in a board that was operating fairly well up to that point. With that little bit of intro to kind of set the scene, I'm going to, Sonia, sort of, I think, start off with you. And I think this is what you're also going to kind of be alluding to, considering your background, is on communication and the areas and the parts and the elements of communication, the building blocks of communication, that we as mere mortals, human beings, are often not really aware of in ourselves and in other people. So let me hand over to you for a few thoughts.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, and thank you very much for that very beautiful introduction of myself and also Paul. And good afternoon, Paul. Nice to see you again.
And you, yes, Sonia. Good to see you.
Let's start off with that pie chart, and also welcome, to everyone who's listening in and watching us. I think I want to steal a word from you that you mentioned earlier, and it has to do with observation, because if we look at life and boardrooms and everyday communication and how we observe life and people around us, we tend to use our five senses. We all know that we hear, we see, we taste, we touch, and of course, we smell. And I will come to smell as well, if I have a chance for that. If we look at the pie chart in front of us at the moment, this survey has been repeated many times, and it comes down to this, that 55% of what we observe is what we see. In other words, we look at dress and we look at body language, while the 38% has to do with tone of voice, or your tonality, and only 7% has to do with the content, or that of what and which you are saying. So it becomes a bit of a surprise to many people that I work so hard at preparing my speech and what I want to tell people, and ultimately people are, more than anything else, watching me and seeing me and observing what I'm doing, and then making or forming a perception of me. I would like for us to just move on to the next slide, which has to do with the silent language that we speak, and that there are certain categories that I want to first of all point out, because we do not have time for all of them. But I want to look at a few things that influence greatly how people see you. And at a later stage, just for interest's sake, on this body language, we could also discuss digital communication. And as we all know nowadays, we do so many Zoom or so many Teams meetings, and there's also a different approach to that. For today's purpose, I'm going to be doing a person-to-person in a boardroom. And the first thing I'd like to quickly discuss with you is something called posture. It also falls under the group or the category of illustrators, but for our purposes, we're going to be speaking about posture. Now, most of us sitting here this morning know that I shouldn't be slouching in my chair or be in the back of the screen as I am at the moment, or legs wide open and just looking too relaxed. But I want to think about when I sit in the boardroom, and I'm going a little bit more practical now, that I do look interested and as if I'm leaning into the conversation that's happening at the time. Now, remember, this is going to link in with our eye contact and our gestures, but for the purpose of just posture. Shoulders that are straight. And again, we're going to be looking a little bit at dress and appearance just now. Straight shoulders mean I will be wearing something that creates that image, and 90% of the time that would be a jacket. Am I sitting up straight? Am I opening up my diaphragm area for me to be able to breathe? Because when I breathe, I remain more relaxed. And then while I'm upright, is my chin in the right position? Am I too low? Do I look as if I'm in a bad mood? Am I speaking to the table or lower down here? Am I on the right level to people sitting around a table? And even when I stand up, am I on the right level of them then? Or is my chin too high, as so many of us tend to do the moment we get intimidated? It has nothing to do with snobbishness. the fact that we are intimidated then means that we lift our chins because I'm trying to sort of see over you and be over you. So think about posture. How am I using mine? And also when I observe in the boardroom, what do I see? Do I see in people's posture perhaps a little bit of boredom? Do I see in a gesture combined with the posture perhaps not as much as a yawn, but do I see people looking really bored? People busy with their cell phones, busy making notes, something like that. So also the observation of posture in the boardroom will give you certain silent messages from people and how they're experiencing what you are saying. Be aware of that. Perhaps whilst you're speaking, you need to include that person, or you need to somehow ask a couple of questions to your board members to get them to feel like they are involved. Let's move along to something called affect displays, and that really has to do with your facial expressions. What does your face look like when you speak to people? And use your mirror in this instance, because I find we don't always realize that when thinking or being busy with a conversation, that our faces become very stern and that we can look as if we are completely unapproachable. And on that same token, I want to speak about glasses quickly. Again, something that can become a barrier. It links into dress and appearance just now that we will touch on, but are your glasses complementary? Do they actually assist your facial expression to look approachable and friendly and open and listening to what people are saying? Or is it becoming a non-complementary part of what you look like? Then eyebrows. Interesting, if you look at animation pictures, you look at cartoons, you'll find that the eyebrows create a certain emotion for you. Do I look surprised? Do I look angry? Do I look whatever kind? And yes, how are you managing your eyebrows? And I find that men, and I don't mean to be sexist here, but men tend to not think about what an impact these things can sometimes have on the audience or on the rest of the board. As while sitting down, a face that's thinking, and I need to perhaps take my glasses off, that looks as if, what are you talking about? Or I do not agree with this at all. So we need to watch out for those things before and whilst we are speaking. And this talk this morning really has to do more with awareness than anything else. Body language is a very unconscious thing. In other words, people don't think as much about what they're doing, but rather that it happens naturally. And we are trying to get us to be more aware and then slightly manage it. Yes, I don't want us all to go to acting classes and suddenly have this perfect face and sit in front of people and know when to smile. Of course, we have to remain sincere. We have to remain listening and part of the conversation that's going on. But if you know some of these cues that really do have a negative effect, is something that you can adjust slightly. Then the third one I want to touch on is something called eye contact. Being from a very adverse background in South Africa, we all, in some of our cultures, have different eye contact mannerisms or manners in when we show respect, when we look directly at people, when we look away, when we look down. But in the boardroom, as a norm, we want to make eye contact with people to create the message or send the message of, I'm listening to you, I care about you, I care about what you are saying at the moment. I don't want to stare at you all the time because that's going to make you feel very uncomfortable. So I do want to share and balance my eye contact equally with the entire room. But whilst you are speaking, I do want to really show you with my eyes. Remember that old story about the eyes really are the windows to the soul. You show someone with eyes. Do I like what you are saying? Do I agree with you? Do I think what you're saying is untrue? Think again, where are your eyes? Do you cover everyone, people on your right, on your left? Do you really make an effort to keep eye contact? Not just a glance, but really look at people and care about them and show that care. Let's move on to our next slide. Then we're going to have a quick look at dress and appearance. I would also want to invite questions about this because I'm going to go through this very quickly. I spoke about cut earlier, and that was about the fact that I want a square shoulder. It simply shows that people find us more reliable. So when you, especially when you have a smaller or a rounder shoulder, try to keep it nice and upright and straight, even those old shoulder pads we used to get in the older days. Then a color, please remember that dark blue, navies and blacks still creates an image of authority, but there's nothing wrong with bringing a color in, with whether your shirt, your blouse, your scarf. We do try and steer clear from baby blues, baby pinks, baby colors or pastel colors. And very important question to ask yourself before you start dressing is, who is my audience? Because this will also greatly influence, what do I wear today? Remember I said in the beginning, our norm today will be the boardroom and a professional look. But you might be invited to go and speak to a group of students. And then you do not want to create this very formal and very almost stern look. Make sure that you are comfortable, your shoes especially. Make sure that you are well groomed, that hair is out of your face. People look at your hands whilst you're speaking. Make sure that shoes are clean. And people might say to me, but Sonia, really are these factors so important? But you know, these are the elements that you can manage before you go into the boardroom. You can pick a nice outfit. You can make sure that your makeup, your hair, everything is in place. At least it takes some of that stress away and creates a certain picture that you know your audience wants to see. I mean, imagine me sitting down here this morning with a cowboy hat and a cigar in my mouth. Immediately there would have been, and I'm using the extreme now, but immediately your impression of me would be something completely different. And I'm not saying go as far out as that, but think about what is it that people want to see in front of them when they look at me in the boardroom. All in all those C's really link into being a conservative look, unfortunately. We want to create a look of control and of professionalism. Then on the right-hand side, I'm going to go through this very quickly. We have to still think about tone of voice. Again, if I had to speak to you the entire morning in a voice like this, and I were to address you like a bunch of little children, you would have thought I was a very soft kind of a person, and I'm quite sensitive. But if I'd been speaking like this the entire morning, you also would have thought, wow, she's quite angry, and I don't want to get into any trouble with her. See what I'm saying? You want a tone of voice that instills a certain picture with people. Is it confident? Do I look animated and interesting? Do I look friendly and approachable? Do I seem as if I'm interested in listening to what you're saying, or am I just monotonous and sitting like this and my entire body language tells you I'm not listening? So yes, there are many factors to consider when you're in front of people. And like I said, it's all about awareness today. We're not going into these things in depth, but it's a very good way or a good start. If I still have a minute, I would like to think about handshake and touch. We spoke about it the other day at length again. Nowadays, people love to hug. So many people feel uncomfortable with it. Is it really suitable or in the workplace and in the boardroom? Nowadays, after COVID, a lot of people are scared to shake a hand. We seem to have gotten away from that. And now we just stand like a little statue on the side and, nod our heads and say, good morning. And that touch as part of body language is really a very important element. People want to be touched. We need to be touched. It has been proven that we crave touch. And in touching people, when you greet them, and I'm not speaking about a kiss or a hug, I'm speaking about a handshake, people will remember you and who you are better. And they read a lot into that handshake. That handshake can show I am confident. Even though I'm female, that handshake can also show I'm quite weak. I don't know where I'm going. So how strong should my handshake be? How deep should it be into the other hand? Do I do our typical South African handshake? Who is my audience? Look at it. Think about your handshake. It's not just this is who I am and this is who I'm going to be and this is how I do it. We try to modify the way that we are, to build the best relationships, to get the best out of our communication with people. And that means I'm flexible. I'm flexible when I communicate, to think about who you are and to think about who I am as well when we get to Paul, of course, because, and I don't want to take anything away from him, but where you are sometimes influences what you do, of course. And sometimes you are not where you want to be. But this is when I come in and I say, fake it till you make it sometimes. Last one I wanted to just touch on, second last rather. In the boardroom, how do I manage my body? How far away do I sit from people? Do I stand? If I do stand, how far away do I stand from them? Remember, we have 4 different kinds of spaces around us. We have an intimate, a social, intimate, personal, social, and a 4th one, which is further away even. I'm sorry, it's just slipped my mind for the moment. But we want to be about 60 centimeters and closer to people who are very close to us, our family members, our partners. Then we get something called a personal space where we will let friends and colleagues whom we are close with. Then we get a social space. Make sure that you do not intimidate people or step into their spaces. Just like sometimes you'll drive in your car and somebody will tailgate you and you'll actually feel this guy is too close, where your car is almost your social space at that time. So also in the boardroom, do I want to make somebody feel uncomfortable or that I do not agree with them and then step closer to them and stand on top of them while I'm speaking, behind their chair perhaps? Or would I want to keep that comfortable distance between us of, I like you very much and I'd like to get to know you better and hear what you have to say? Or do I stay so far away to show you that I don't know you as yet, I'm not trusting you as yet? Remember, when our body language lines up with what we are saying, we have good relationships with people, we get trust from them, we find clarity, we find rapport with people. The moment your body language does not link up with what you are saying, you find people will not trust what you are saying. There will be tension amongst the two of you. And all of us listening and watching this morning will tell me that some people you know so well, you know when they're lying just from their body language, you know when they're not telling the truth, you know when they're making a joke, you know when they're hiding something. Do we not in the boardroom want to get to know ourselves and our boardroom members or our colleagues better so that we will know them almost not on that level necessarily, but a better level? And then the last thing I want to touch on is something that we call mirroring. Mirroring is a communication concept that works perfectly every time. If somebody runs into your office and they say, oh, you won't believe what happened to me today, then you don't go. But the opposite's also true. If somebody walks into your room and they say, your office, and they say, oh, you won't believe what happened to me this morning, you will say, oh, what? So we mirror people and mirror one another naturally and automatically. So the energy, the image, the body language that you stand up with in the boardroom is exactly how your board members will respond with. If you are enthusiastic, if you are confident, if you are trusting, this is what people will return to you. However, if you do look insecure, if your voice is not confident, if you have these anxious little moves, people will read that and they are going to respond in exactly that way. This I can promise you. I'm wide open for questions when we are ready for those. Thank you very much.
Sonia,
and
thank you. We can listen, I think, we continue listening to this because as I listen to you, I just realize how, to your point, how unaware we are about our demeanor, and our little habits that we have as well. And the reality as well, Paul, and I'm going to kind of move over to you. Sonia is our communication expert, and she's already touched on a few very critical points for us in boardroom. Because the reality, you and I, who kind of sat in many board meetings through our career, realized that you have one of the elements of what we say in the King Report, for example, is important for an effective board is diversity. So you don't want people who all think and behave the same. You want that kind of diverse viewpoint and paradigms and cultures and backgrounds and all elements of diversity. But if you then, to Sonia's point, do not have that self-awareness, number one, that can in itself create a lot of unfortunate, I think, element dynamics and undercurrents that one needs to be, that could unfortunately derail the effectiveness and the functionality of the board. So, Paul, can I kind of ask you to take it into the board for us now as well, and share with us your views, especially with your background on the EQ, the emotional intelligence side as well?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anna-Marie. And Sonia, what you said there, so many things resonated with me. And I remember when I was a lot younger, and I've always worn glasses, and I used to have these big, thick black glasses, and people would say to me, we don't know if what you're saying is genuine because we can't see your eyes, they're hidden. And I always created this sort of barrier against what I was saying and against the people with me. And so I realized that I needed to be more visible and just all of that whole body language and how I present myself. And so much of that is about self-awareness. And so a lot of what Sonia has talked about, body language, is related to EQ in the sense that you have to be aware of how you show up in the boardroom and elsewhere and the impressions that you create. And so they are key to building trust, and particularly in the boardroom, I think there's a lot of considerations that I'll just go through here, which I think often tend to get overlooked. I mean, first of all, of course, people join boards, I think, with, whenever I've spoken to directors, they always join with the best intentions. They want to make a difference. Maybe it's personal prestige, maybe it's good on their CV, but often it's, for example, passion for the mission. It's rarely about financial, it's rarely about the money, but sometimes along the way, that motivation, those best intentions, they tend to get subverted because often the processes in place do not support what they're trying to achieve. Or maybe even it's when you have other directors in place where perhaps there's conflict occurring, and personalities in the boardroom. It's so critical to have the right mix of personalities. And sometimes when there is conflict, the board itself doesn't have the skills or the mechanisms to address conflict when it happens. So I think part of the problem is that we don't always recruit. Anna-Marie, you talked about, the person down the golf club, and I know a person who can be a good fit for this board, but we're not really doing that. Although we're more professional now, I think there's still a long way to go in terms of recruitment for directors. What we should be doing more of is recruiting for cultural fit. And often what I see in board matrices, for example, is that they're not really assessing or looking for the soft skills. We're looking more at the technical attributes, their sort of track record in the industry in which we operate. So because they're often brought in for that technical expertise or that sector knowledge, they often may be lacking the sort of what I call the board craft. And what I mean by that is the board dynamics, the soft skills, the teamwork, all those really good debates and decision making that ultimately I think will make or break a board. And Anna-Marie, you talked about an example where you just had one person that could completely upset the apple cart and turn a high functioning board into one that is riven by conflict. And so we often forget about that, and we don't think about that. And if a director comes in, like a bull in a china shop, I've seen that so many times. Those sort of directors are really trained in those soft skills, the good listening, the self-awareness, even perhaps being aware of their own cognitive biases. And one thing that I will always say to a new director when I'm onboarding them is that leave your ego at the door, okay? our demeanor is so critical in the boardroom. And Sonia, you talked about dress and appearance and you know, the whole aspect of eye contact and your posture. All of these things are very, very important to establish a degree of credibility as well. Because let's be honest, there's a degree of, shall we say, intellectual dueling taking place. And we're still programmed through evolution to perceive a threat. And this can often show up through a person's facial expressions, their tone of voice, as Sonia mentioned, the posture, even the breathing. So unless you want to be intimidating and unapproachable, it's so important to work on your body language. And like I say, I've seen some directors that are fairly sort of ego driven, and they adopt this sort of power pose to assert themselves and maybe, you know, create this aura of dominance. Okay, but that's, to me, that's somewhat the opposite of what serving on a board is about. It's about teamwork. And that's why I think the mindset element is so critical as well, because if you come into it as a director and you think of it as a battleground in which your ideas must prevail, well, quite frankly, that's undermining your fiduciary duties to the company. If we're more open-minded and flexible, I think that will naturally show in our body language, because mind and body are intimately acquainted. We can't separate the two, and we will get shown up. You know, it will show when we are trying to assert dominance. That will, all of that aura through the body language will demonstrate that. And Sonia mentioned about the fact that 93% of communication is non-verbal. Okay, I think test that on your friends and see the response you get. Remember, it's not what you say, but how you say it. And people tend to remember how you made them feel, not what you said. Okay, that's I think is very, very important point to recall. It's often just the overall impression that a person gave, and that's why being approachable is so important, that art of good communication. Okay, and so we should always be recruiting for that cultural fit. We should be looking for the soft skills. Okay, and I think that any board that fails to conduct in my view, an EQ, an emotional intelligence based assessment of the candidate, is setting themselves up for failure. And I recently worked with a startup and I recommended such an assessment. And the founder, the CEO, just shot me down and said, no, I don't need that. The candidate's absolute perfect, exactly what we need. That new director was technically in the clouds and very charming interviews, but it was really all of the front. Once he got in, he left a trail of destruction. Okay, and it gives me no pleasure when I say to boards or a CEO, I told you so. Okay, not much pleasure anyway. Sometimes it can be satisfying, but you know, you need to understand that the soft skills are so critical. And so how does that convey itself? So a few simple tips here for directors. Well, first of all, of course, make yourself approachable, relax. You know, I see so many directors that are wound up and tense and stressed before they even get into the board meeting. So learn to relax and smile more. That will make you naturally more approachable, and it will help you to do something which is very, very critical to, and that underpins, I think, the whole aspect of board teamwork, which is building relationships as well. And focus on that. Remember that you are a part of the team. And I think that you can enrich the discussion by sharing your ideas, but don't be so hung up on always being right. Okay, we tend to, as I say, we tend to let our ego get in the way, and it's important that we understand that, you know, we don't need to be first among equals. Okay, we don't need to approach the board debates with the intent of winning, but it's more about sharing ideas. And very importantly as well, and this will show up in your body language and your demeanor, it's also about being open-minded and listening to the other perspective as well, and listening without bias. Because if you adopt a learning mindset, and an intent to learn and to understand different perspectives. That to me is the learning director is the best type of director that you can have, that open-minded. Okay, and that will create a degree of confidence around your positive body language as well. When you're confident and you're happy in the environment, that will show up in everything, your posture, your facial expression, and so on. So let's think about some guidance then for the boards. We talked a little bit about directors. So I think one of the things is very important to consider is when you're looking at the soft skills of individual directors, always include this as part of your assessment, okay? Because board dynamics as an element in any board assessment is so important as well to be considered. In other words, when you're evaluating the performance of the boards, it's rarely the questions about, oh, well, how technically brilliant that person is. It's how they were a team player and how they worked with others to create good discussions and ultimately good decisions, because you need good debates in order to make informed decisions. To ensure that the board skills matrix, if you're working with the chair or you are a chair and you're developing a skills matrix, focus as well on the soft skills. Think about the personal attributes. For example, are they curious? Are they open-minded? Think about their interpersonal attributes as well. Are they a good relationship builder? Are they cognitively diverse in their thinking? Are they adept at resolving conflict? And of course, the leadership skills as well. Influencer, are they someone that can convey their ideas and communicate and articulate their viewpoints in a way that builds influence? Are they visionary? Are they looking at the bigger picture? And are they that good communicator, that person that can really articulate their ideas and sweep people up in their views, inspire them? These are such important attributes to have as the director. So I think conducting that detailed behavioral assessment of a board candidate, asking the right questions, because weeding them out at the application stage will save a lot of pain later down the line. It's so important to make sure that we understand all of that right at the outset. Train your directors on how to be a director. In other words, get them to understand what being a director means legally and ethically and procedurally as well, and how to exercise that degree of independence as well, so that they're objective, they're thinking about not themselves, but they're thinking about the interests of the board and the organization that they serve, and how to demonstrate that board craft that I talked about earlier, which is, how to conduct themselves with the right mindset, the right behaviors, and how to make an effective contribution. So I think being a director is a learned skill, just like everything else. You have to practice at it. So recognize also that the board culture, those unwritten rules and ways of doing things, they will be shaped by the personalities of the directors in place. Okay, and it's so important as well for the chair to lead and for the board to set the tone. And the chair leads productive board discussions and build a framework around board preparation. For example, if your chair, I think, is not fully trained to be a chair, then maybe the chair needs some training as well. And ensuring that all of the directors and the chair leads them in this exercise is that they're fully prepared, they show up, they're ready for the meeting. They're not, as Sonia mentioned, they're not slouching in their chairs, checking their phones and looking all around them, looking bored. It's important that everyone is fully engaged. And I have to say that during the pandemic, when we all suddenly moved to virtual meetings, and then I was having to arrange as a corporate secretary these sort of virtual meetings, it was way harder to see if everyone was fully engaged. And so what we did actually in our organization was we created a set of rules and processes for virtual meetings as well, to make sure that everyone was fully engaged. And remember as well that the best board is a learning board. And one of my colleagues, a governance guru, Bob Garrett, has said that in his book, The best board is a learning board. Okay, so you need to create the environment where we can grow together. And I think how we conduct ourselves, our behavior, our body language, our communication is central to all of that. And so to summarize all of that, work on the soft skills, work on the EQ side, because that will make for a much more cohesive and a board with good teamwork and good skills, where we all enjoy turning up for a board meeting and don't dread it.
Well,
That's
thank you
really.
so much. Thank you so much to you and Sonia. We've got another kind of 10, 12 minutes for conversation. I think there's some questions coming through that I'm going to pose to you as well. But while I look at the questions, and I'm going to stop sharing, I'm sure people have seen also the detail of our next upcoming webinar in October on the very hot topic, no pun intended, of climate change. But so I'm going to stop sharing that and just kind of have a bit of a conversation. And Sonia, I want to kind of address my first question to you, because as much as we have directors on the call, we also have quite a number of company secretaries and corporate secretaries, and you have worked with a team at Float Rock, and you've done some excellent work in helping them on presentation skills. But, you know, talk about intimidating, an intimidating environment it is for a company secretary to move into a boardroom with all of these very powerful, sometimes, you know, ego-driven individuals, and kind of seen by some as a glorified minute taker, while you actually have so much more that you can, you know, value that you can add and want to add. You're kind of just from a communication, how do I show up perspective, to speak in for 2 minutes to the company secretaries in the room as well.
Certainly, Anna-Marie. I do want to just touch on dress the way that you want to look like they do. And then the old tool or secret of breathing to keep yourself calm in situations like that. To be able to be very prepared, needless to say. And when a question is asked, not to back down. If you have the answer, do speak up with confidence. And it often happens that the COSEC has all and the most information in their hand, but they're too scared to speak up. So please do speak up. Get up when you speak up. Do not stay in your chair and tiny and just make a small mention of something. Take the moment, take the floor, behave in such a way that people will believe you. But it comes back to a little bit of Paul's EQ, believing yourself. Because you can do, and you do all the things that I'm telling you at the moment, but that belief in yourself, when you get the opportunity to stand up and have the confidence to speak up. Speak clearly, speak audible. All right, I hope that answers it to an extent.
Absolutely, Sonia. When I train company secretaries, I always kind of also make the point that this is a profession. Therefore, I'm a professional. Therefore, I show up as a professional. To your point, the way I dress, the way I greet people, the way I look them. And I'm very grateful to my father, who taught me, even as a girl, to kind of, you know, do a proper handshake. And I often still get comments from men. I don't know whether it's good or bad. You know, I've got quite a firm handshake, but my father taught me that, and to look people in the eye when I do shake their hands. But, you know, I say to the company secretaries when I train them, even if I do not know the answer, I say that with confidence.
Absolutely. And I want to tell you this, that many people around that boardroom table will probably have on the inside such a mix of emotions and fear and intimidation going on, but to not display that, to show that, to put that confident picture up, gets you quite far.
Yeah. No, I say if they smell, I would say kind of, you know, the way you show up is so important, because if they smell fear in you, they will eat you for breakfast.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's unfortunately the reality that we have. Paul, we had a question that I think with your corporate secretariat background, you probably would be, you know, probably in the right position, the appropriate person to respond to this. It was more about the build up to a board meeting, you know, the way we communicate, the induction of individuals and directors and the papers they eventually get, when they get it and how much they get, all of that. What kind of impact does that have eventually when you come into the boardroom?
Yes, it's a great question. And I think that when we think about the corporate secretary, and our role has evolved hugely, and just as you asked the previous question, I was just thinking about when I first came onto a board or servicing a board, I was as a young corporate secretary, and I just wanted to be that person that would be in the corner, silent and unnoticed, just being that scribe and hoping that nobody would talk to me at any point whilst I just concentrate on my minutes. And then suddenly the board chair in one board meeting just turned around and said, Mr. Dubell, what do you think to this? And I was like a deer in the headlights, and I didn't know what to say, and I stumbled over my words, and I thought, I need to get better communication skills. And I joined Toastmasters and worked along that. And it really comes down to, I think, that all of these aspects is about confidence. And so, and as you build your experience and your knowledge, then the confidence will hopefully follow. But I think we need to also actively work on it as well. And that's why I believe that EQ is a very important process of self-development. But getting back to how we prepare our directors, I think one of the things that I've seen since I was that person in the corner to now is that there has been a huge evolution in the role and importance of a corporate secretary, often through the fact that, you know, we are regarded now as a chief governance officer. You know, we are the subject matter expert in the boardroom on those matters. And I think that the work that you do before the board meeting, the work that you do with the directors in terms of building relationships and preparing them to be effective board directors is fundamental to ultimately the success of the board meeting. So I do feel that a corporate secretary, alongside with the chair and other key players, are a critical element in the success of a board meeting, because, you know, most battles are won or lost before they're fought. I think that was a quote from Sun Tzu on around strategy. And I think that's true with board meetings, because you need to make sure that the preparation is in place. Now, one of the things that I would always do with new directors, for example, is to help them to prepare. And I talked about board craft and just helping them to understand the culture of the board and when would be the right time, coaching them all to ask questions, for example, and coaching them how to ask questions so that it brought the discussion forward, not stalled it in its tracks, and helping them to cultivate the right mindset as well, that's not to be that ego-driven person, but to, you know, to operate seamlessly within the board. So I think that element of preparation before the board meeting, but also preparation of directors as part of their induction and orientation, can really set the scene for a good teamwork and ultimately good debate and good decisions.
Thanks, Paul. It's really, I think that you touched on a very important point. It's relationships, it's building relationships. I talk often as kind of stealing the concept from, I think, Stephen Covey's book on 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talking about the emotional bank account, you know, and you can't make a withdrawal if you've not made a deposit first. And how you know, it's really our people, company secretaries, EQ people skills are critical in your success, you know, as a corporate secretary or as a company secretary. Sonia, there's a question you've already kind of, when you spoke, you alluded to cultural differences, for example, the eye contact. Are there any other cultural differences that you think could play out in the corporate sphere that we should be aware of?
Anna-Marie, yes, I'm quickly going to mention 1 or 2 things. And I always, before I answer a question like this, I say, please keep in mind, these are guidelines. They don't work for everyone. Culturally in South Africa, and I'm going to focus on our environment, seeing that we are having this conversation here. Keep in mind that growing up in a larger family or more family members in a smaller space gives us a smaller personal space or an area around us. Which means when I deal with somebody from another background, I might want to think, how did this person grow up? Think a little bit about them. Do I stand closer to them to win trust? Or do I stand a little bit further away? I've mentioned that before, but you will be surprised at how your relationship with people improve when you, and I want to use the word respect, but sometimes that respecting that space means it's a smaller space. So sometimes it's closer to those people. Making good eye contact. One more thing I wanted to mention was, remember that barrier of language, that when I speak to people, that I make sure they understand what I'm asking, that I acknowledge them in another way, that I use their names, because often their names are not as comfortable on the tongue, but that I show them I'm making an effort to get to know who you are actually. So I use your name, I get closer to you, I look at you when I speak to you. I do not get offended when you do not make constant eye contact with me, because I understand where you come from and that your eye contact, in fact, dictates that you should look away out of respect. Certain backgrounds, not all of them. Find out more about one another. And then in that, building that relationship, also get to know how we do things. That sometimes some people will speak louder. We experience it as loud. Well, to other people, it's completely normal. And then having to change that behavior, because this is now how we do this in the office, in and around one another. So that also makes me feel, the one who's speaking loud, intimidated and uncomfortable where I am now. I suddenly have to speak softer and whatever. But getting to know our differences is the only way for us to really overcome it. And when Paul spoke earlier about leaving your ego, this also has to do with leaving your ego and being open to adversity. And our wonderful cultures in our country, that we have so much to learn from one another, and all it's going to do is develop us as human beings, only for the betterment and the benefit of everyone.
But I think to put it in a very frank way, really the message is get over yourself. You know, before you go into the board. Paul, a quick question: EQ assessment tools or providers, what would you recommend? Is it maybe a quick way that we can include some of those tests in our assessments of board members?
Yeah, so as I think you mentioned in your lovely bio of me, Anna-Marie, that I'm an EQI certified assessor. And so when I do the assessments, I will assess people based on various EQ assessments, which is around interpersonal skills, self-awareness, how you communicate, how you express yourself, how you make decisions as well, and ensure that emotions don't get in the way, for example, of good decision making, how you deal with adversity as well, stress tolerance, all of those things are key to being an effective director. So I administer a EQ assessment covering those areas, but there's quite a few on the market as well. Some of you may have heard of Daniel Goleman, who essentially was the guru, if you like, for his book, on emotional intelligence, in around, I want to say now the mid-90s, how it can matter more than IQ, the EQ side. That set the tone really for the whole work around emotional intelligence. And so it's still an evolving field, you know, emotional intelligence, there's still so much more we can learn about the way that people react in certain situations. And so often it can be unpredictable as well. So there are various assessments out there. And say Daniel Goleman, his academy does produce a good assessment as well. And I've actually been in the process of working with the board at the moment, where they are looking for an assessment, an EQ assessment that was specific to their board. And so it really consists of a range of behavioral questions, because the thing with the EQ assessment is that it's a self-assessment, and therefore it's designed for you to understand your strengths and weaknesses. So it can be very transformative in terms of understanding what you need to work on in terms of your leadership skills. But it's not such a great tool for recruiting, because it's not designed for that purpose. Because of course, if you wanted to, if you were of that mind, you could try and manipulate the results by the answers that you give, because it's a self-assessment. but it's better to, obviously you need to be honest in your answers if you want to create true self-awareness, to understand, you know, what you need to work on. So I would say that that type of assessment is good for individuals to understand where they need to work on. And what I've done is I've worked with boards, for example, existing boards, when they've had conflict issues, and we've done the EQ assessment, and I've said to them, you have to be honest in the answers. It's helpful for that because it can then cover some of those and address some of those issues that the board may be having. But as a assessment or a recruitment tool, it doesn't work so well, and that's why developing a behavioral questionnaire, like behavioral interview, where the individual is required to demonstrate and give evidence of leadership skills, that would work better. But certainly I can, you know, happy to on that question provide some more resources around that offline as well.
Thank you, Paul. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. There's so much, you know, that we could really expand on. I was just thinking, I wish we had time to talk about independence and the behavior to instill confidence in our independence as board members. That in itself, I think, is a topic that kind of, you know, would justify a webinar, a separate webinar. There was one question about, you know, how do you deal with a difficult board member who disagrees with you? And if I can just make 2 points in response to that question and go back to Stephen Covey to always say, you know, also as a company secretary, get over yourself and seek first to understand, then to be understood. Number one. Number two, to remember that you can also be wrong, and therefore, you know, one needs to really listen carefully. And thirdly, that you that it's not a contest, you know, that one would put your point, and trust is earned, respect is earned. It takes time to get the board to kind of really trust you and respect you. And afterwards, not to try and score points in the boardroom, but rather deal with it then off the record and after the board meeting. So, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, with that, we have to go. Sonia, Paul, thank you so much again. We really appreciate it. I can see the comments coming in. Everybody saying this was really a great seminar, and absolutely thanks to both of you for your contribution. To everyone who joined us today, thank you so much. We look forward, God willing, to host you again in October on climate change, and wishing you all an absolute good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, and thank you, Paul, and thank you to everyone who was watching. It really has been a pleasure. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you
ladies and gents. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, Sonia. See you.
Afternoon.